It all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past are all learned with workers' blood and mistakes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the October 3rd, 2022 edition of the show, and it is week 422 since the closing of the North Adams Regional Hospital. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is, we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is our custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23 at the beginning of the show.
So I'll do the first two.
Sure, if you wish.
Article 23, number 1. Everyone has the right to work, the free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Number 2, everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration or compensation, ensuring for himself or herself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Number 4, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of her or his interests. Last week, Dick, we were going to show another video, but we ran out of time. We didn't have enough space for it. And it was on something
It was on
Luma?
people who are refugees. And that's another part of our Declaration of Human Rights. People have freedom to seek asylum in other countries. So my wife had been reading these books, and I'll hold them up. So the first book that she read, it's called The Outcasts United by Warren St. John. And it was written in 2009, and he was a New York Times news reporter, but he went down and did a story about this soccer team. They called them the Fugees. Fugees. It was a soccer team, the boys' soccer team, but they were all people in Charleston, Georgia, and they were all refugees. And then in 2001, during the pandemic, she wrote this book, Luma Mufflet, and it's Learning America, and it's talking about her journey as a teacher, and she set up her own academy for refugees. And so in 2017, there was a TED Talk that she got invited to do, and so we're going to show that, and we'll go from there.
I remember when I first found out I was going to speak at a TED conference. I ran across the hall to one of my classrooms to inform my students. Guess what, guys? I've been asked to give a TED Talk. The reaction wasn't one I quite expected. The whole room went silent. A TED Talk? You mean like the one you made us watch on Grit, or the one with the scientist that did this really awesome thing with robots, Muhammad asked. Yes, just like that. But coach, those people are really important and smart. I know that. But coach, why are you speaking? You hate public speaking. I do, I admitted. But it's important that I speak about us, that I speak about your journeys, about my journey. People need to know. The students at the all-refugee school that I founded decided to end with some words of encouragement. Cool, it better be good, coach. There are 65.3 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes because of war or persecution. The largest number, 11 million, are from Syria. 33,952 people flee their homes daily. The vast majority remain in refugee camps whose conditions cannot be defined as humane under anyone's definition. We are participating in the degradation of humans. Never have we had numbers this high. This is the highest number of refugees since World War II. Now let me tell you why this issue is so important to me. I'm an Arab, I'm an immigrant, I'm a Muslim. I've also spent the last 12 years of my life working with refugees. Oh, and I'm also gay. It makes me really popular these days. But I am the daughter of a refugee. My grandmother fled Syria in 1964 during the first Assad regime. She was 3 months pregnant when she packed up a suitcase, piled in her 5 children, and drove to neighboring Jordan, not knowing what the future held for her and her family. My grandfather decided to stay, not believing it was that bad. He followed her a month later after his brothers were tortured and his factory was taken over by the government. They rebuilt their lives starting from scratch and eventually became independently wealthy Jordanian citizens. I was born in Jordan 11 years later. It was really important to my grandmother for us to know our history and our journey. I was 8 years old when she took me to visit my first refugee camp. I didn't understand why. I didn't know why it was so important to her for us to go. I remember walking into the camp, holding her hand, and her saying, "Go play with the kids," while she visited with the women in the camp. I didn't want to. These kids weren't like me. They were poor. They lived in a camp. I refused. She knelt down beside me and firmly said, "Go. And don't come back until you've played. Don't ever think people are beneath you or that you have nothing to learn from others." I reluctantly went. I never wanted to disappoint my grandmother. I returned a few hours later, having spent some time playing soccer with the kids in the camp. We walked out of the camp, and I was excitedly telling her what a great time I had and how fantastic the kids were. "Haram," I said in Arabic, "pour them." "Haram on us," she said, using the words different meaning, that we were sinning. "Don't feel sorry for them, believe in them." It wasn't until I left my country of origin for the United States that I realized the impact of her words. After my college graduation, I applied for and was granted political asylum based on being a member of a social group. Some people may not realize this, but you can still get the death penalty in some countries for being gay. I had to give up my Jordanian citizenship. That was the hardest decision I've ever had to make, but I had no other choice. The point is, when you find yourself choosing between home and survival, the question, "Where are you from?" becomes very loaded. A Syrian woman who I recently met at a refugee camp in Greece articulated best when she recalled the exact moment she realized she had to flee Aleppo. I looked out the window and there was nothing. It was all rubble. There were no stores, no streets, no schools. Everything was gone. I'd been in my apartment for months, listening to bombs drop and watching people die. But I always thought it would get better, that no one could force me to leave, no one could take my home away from me. And I don't know why it was that morning, but when I looked outside, I realized if I didn't leave, my 3 young children would die. And so we left. We left because we had to, not because we wanted to. There was no choice, she said. It's kind of hard to believe that you belong when you don't have a home, when your country of origin rejects you because of fear or persecution, or the city that you grew up in is completely destroyed. I didn't feel like I had a home. I was no longer a Jordanian citizen, but I wasn't American either. I felt a kind of loneliness that's still hard to put into words today. After college, I desperately needed to find a place to call home. I bounced around from state to state and eventually ended up in North Carolina. Kind-hearted people who felt sorry for me offered to pay rent, or buy me a meal, or a suit for my new interview. It just made me feel more isolated and incapable. It wasn't until I met Miss Sarah, a Southern Baptist, who took me in at my lowest and gave me a job that I started to believe in myself. Miss Sarah owned a diner in the mountains of North Carolina. I assumed, because of my privileged upbringing and my 7-sister education, that she would ask me to manage the restaurant. I was wrong. I started off washing dishes, cleaning toilets, and working the grill. I was humbled. I was shown the value of hard work, but most importantly, I felt valued and embraced. I celebrated Christmas with her family, and she attempted to observe Ramadan with me. I remember being very nervous about coming out to her. After all, she was a Southern Baptist. I sat on the couch next to her and I said, "Miss Sarah, you know that I'm gay." Her response is one that I will never forget. "That's fine, honey, just don't be a slut." I eventually moved to Atlanta, still trying to find my home. My journey took a strange turn 3 years later after I met a group of refugee kids playing soccer outside. I'd made a wrong turn into this apartment complex, and I saw these kids outside playing soccer. They were playing barefoot with a raggedy soccer ball and rocks set up as goals. I watched them for about an hour, and after that I was smiling. The boys reminded me of home. They reminded me of the way I grew up playing soccer in the streets of Jordan with my brothers and cousins. I eventually joined their game. They were a little skeptical about letting me join it because according to them, girls don't know how to play, but obviously I did. I asked them if they'd ever played on a team. They said they hadn't, but that they would love to. I gradually won them over and we formed our first team. This group of kids would give me a crash course in refugees, poverty, and humanity. 3 brothers from Afghanistan, Rullah, Nurullah, and Zabiullah, played a major role in that. I showed up late to practice one day to find the field completely deserted. I was really worried. My team loved to practice. It wasn't like them to miss practice. I got out of my car and 2 kids ran out from behind a dumpster waving their hands frantically. "Coach, Ru got beat up. He got jumped. There was blood everywhere." "What do you mean? What do you mean he got beat up?" "These bad kids came and they beat him up, coach. Everybody left. They were all scared." We hopped into my car and drove over to Ru's apartment. I knocked on the door and Noor opened it. "Where's Ru? I need to talk to him, see if he's okay." "He's in his room, coach. He's refusing to come out." I knocked on the door. "Ru, come on out. I need to talk to you. I need to see if you're okay or if we need to go to the hospital." He came out. He had a big gash on his head, a split lip, and he was visibly shaken. I was looking at him and I asked the boys to call for their mom because I needed to go to the hospital with him. They called for their mom. She came out. I had my back turned to her and she started screaming in Farsi. The boys fell to the ground laughing. I was very confused because there was nothing funny about this. They explained to me that she said, "You told me your coach was a Muslim and a woman." From behind, I didn't appear to be either to her. "I am Muslim," I said, turning to her. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah," reciting the Muslim declaration of faith. Confused, and perhaps maybe a little bit reassured, she realized that yes, I, this American acting, shorts wearing, non-veiled woman, was indeed a Muslim. Their family had fled the Taliban. Hundreds of people in their village were murdered. Their father was taken in by the Taliban, only to return a few months later, a shell of the man he once was. The family escaped to Pakistan, and the 2 older boys, age 8 and 10 at the time, wove rugs for 10 hours a day to provide for their family. They were so excited when they found out that they had been approved to resettle in the United States, making them the lucky 0.1% who get to do that. They had hit the jackpot. Their story is not unique. Every refugee family I have worked with has had some version of this. I work with kids who've seen their mothers raped, their father's finger sliced off. One kid saw a bullet put in his grandmother's head because she refused to let the rebels take him to be a child soldier. Their journeys are haunting, but what I get to see every day is hope, resilience, determination, a love of life and appreciation for being able to rebuild their lives. I was at the boys' apartment one night when the mom came home after cleaning 18 hotel rooms in one day. She sat down and Noor rubbed her feet, saying that he was going to take care of her once he graduated. She smiled from exhaustion. "God is good. Life is good. We are lucky to be here." In the last 2 years, we have seen an escalating anti-refugee sentiment. It's global. The numbers continue to grow because we do nothing to prevent it and nothing to stop it. The issue shouldn't be stopping refugees from coming into our countries. The issue should be not forcing them to leave their own. Sorry. How much more suffering? How much more suffering must we take? How much more people need to be forced out of their homes before we say enough? 100 million? Not only do we shame, blame, and reject them for atrocities that they had absolutely nothing to do with, we re-traumatize them when we're supposed to be welcoming them into our countries. We strip them of their dignity and treat them like criminals. I had a student in my office a couple of weeks ago. She's originally from Iraq. She broke down crying. Why do they hate us? Who hates you? Everyone. Everyone hates us because we are refugees, because we are Muslim. In the past, I was able to reassure my students that the majority of the world does not hate refugees, but this time I couldn't. I couldn't explain to her why someone tried to rip off her mother's hijab when they were grocery shopping, or why a player on an opposing team called her a terrorist and told her to go back where she came from. I couldn't reassure her that her father's ultimate life sacrifice by serving in the United States military as an interpreter would make her more valued as an American citizen. We take in so few refugees worldwide. We resettle less than 0.1%. That 0.1% benefits us more than them. It dumbfounds me how the word refugee is considered something to be dirty, something to be ashamed of. They have nothing to be ashamed of. We have seen advances in every aspect of our lives except our humanity. There are 65.3 million people who have been forced out of their homes because of war, the largest number in history. We are the ones who should be ashamed. Thank you.
Wow, it was pretty moving.
That was powerful, actually, to be honest. And I've often thought, it isn't how many can we take in, it's how do we stop what's going on in the world that causes refugees to happen? How do you get every world, every country, everybody to agree that everybody has value and that you don't, and let everybody build their lives instead of shoving them away because they might have something you want, or attacking them or doing whatever. And the fear factor in this country has grown exponentially in the last 4 years for this, that somehow if we take them in, we're losing something, and we're really gaining.
Yeah.
But the fear is that they're going to take a job that you might want, and
Yeah.
that job is there because you didn't want it.
I want to read an excerpt from this book. I really encourage you to read these two books. I think we could talk for over an hour on this. Mm-hmm. But just on that issue that you mentioned, I have a section here which talks about a raid. It said, on the morning of September 6th, early in the Fuji season, a team of federal agents descended upon a small town of Stillmore, Georgia, about 3 hours south of Atlanta, looking for illegal immigrants. The raid targeted Critters Incorporated, a local chicken processing plant that employed hundreds of Latino immigrants, some of them illegal, in the trailer park where Critters' workforce lived. By the end of the day, 120 people, most of them Mexican, were in custody. Hundreds more, including women and children, had fled into nearby woods, fearing arrest and deportation. Poultry processing plants had become the front lines in the nation's increasingly heated debate over immigration policy. They offered low-paying, dangerous work in revolting conditions, and at unrelenting pace, work Americans seemed less willing to do than immigrants. at least for the wages offered. Plant managers had come to value immigrant laborers. They worked hard. They feared of getting detained or sent back to their native countries, and often separated from families in the process. They were more compliant than the American workers, less likely to file workers' compensation claims or to support union organizing drives. A significant number of those Latino workers were in the United States illegally. The federal government estimated that the total number of illegal immigrants in Georgia had doubled from 220,000 in 2000 to 470,000 in 2005. The state's Republican governor, Sonny Perdue, had pledged to crack down. Just to give an example of what they're, I mean, I could go into great detail because in this they talk about the mother who goes to work because she has 3 children, a newborn. She can't afford
Babysitters.
daycare for the child, so she takes the job working in the poultry factory, and so she has to drive an hour with a carpool to get to the factory. So she leaves about 7 o'clock at night. She works gets home at 3 in the morning, and it's back-breaking work. Terrible. You just put freshly killed chickens are put in front of you, and you just
Cut them.
cut them up, and that's what you do all night. That's your job. And while that's happening, the 13-year-old boy is taking the responsibility to take care of his
Siblings.
3-month-old sister. Yeah, so he's
right.
doing that after he comes home from soccer practice. And he cooks supper for his siblings and himself, makes her supper. It's just, I mean, that's just one example. This book I highly recommend, and this one also, because it goes into the details of what we don't see.
What we don't even think about, we don't
Yeah.
want to look at, to be honest.
Like
I've never looked at it, never
Yeah.
thought about it.
As soon as the mother started working there, she never ate chicken. She would never eat chicken. When she had enough money to buy meat, she would not buy chicken.
Yeah.
I understand. I work at a chicken farm for just about 7 months, and that was too much for me. I didn't eat chicken for 5 years after that. But it's just these workers are not taking our jobs. They're taking jobs that we don't want to do.
Right, and we should welcome them in.
Right, and the companies are welcoming them in because they know they can hold it over them, that they don't have to pay them
As much.
They can steal their wages. Really, they
Right.
can. They won't. They won't file complaints.
Complaints.
They won't organize a union.
And no, because their fear is that they're going to be sent home, and it's a perfect slave labor force
Right.
in its own way. And
But they're grateful. Like she said, when the mother came home, she was grateful to be in America,
Okay.
grateful to have a job.
And just think, if that's better than what you left, how bad it had to
Yeah.
be.
Well, the one thing she said about it, when she worked in her home country, and I can't remember if it was Africa or I wasn't sure, but she said there was one difficulty in America. She couldn't understand why the mothers had to work so far away from their children. In her home country, when she worked, she could have her children nearby, and she could keep an eye on them when she was doing that work. But,
Right. But here we keep.
But we don't provide the help.
We don't provide the means we don't provide the
For the
daycare.
childcare, yeah.
For the childcare in this country.
Yeah.
because-
Now, in this book, she talked a lot about, because she went through a whole process. She went to Smith College. She was a Smith College graduate. And then she became, an American citizen. She had no money. She had to start a business. She tried to start after working for other people, she just tried to start a diner. That didn't work. Then she started a cleaning service. Like, that woman that was cleaning 18 rooms,
Right.
she was only getting paid by the room. She wasn't getting paid by the hour.
Oh. So,
She was working for this big hotel
hotel,
chain,
and she was
but she was
getting
only getting paid by the room, not by the hour. So she set up a cleaning service, and some of the mothers worked for her, and then she also was coaching these teams. And what a coach she was. I mean, reading about how she coached those kids, she was very disciplined. She had certain rules. They'd have 3-hour practices, but an hour and a half would be tutoring. You'd have to go and do your homework for an hour and a half. Then the other hour and a half, you would go and do practice. But she had her rules, and she was very strict. Had to have your hair cut. You had to show up on time. You couldn't, if you couldn't make it, you couldn't have anybody else call for you, you called.
Right.
And if there was anything out of line, she cut you from the team, even if you were the best player. She cut you from the team. She had very strict rules. And she was a
held-
very disciplined coach, but she was very successful.
Right, and she taught them the value of that too, of hard work and paying off and learning discipline.
Right.
That's really what she was teaching them. She wasn't.
Right,
She was
learned
teaching
in
the
this.
value of discipline.
In this book, she talks about it because finally she wanted to set up an academy called the Fuji Academy. And she would teach them because she would find these kids that she was tutoring, and they'd come home with a report card, and the kid would have an A in English. And she said he was barely literate. About the social promotion that would happen. Well, he's 14 years old, he's got to go to high school, or 15 years old, he's got to go to high school.
Cool.
When these immigrants, refugees, didn't
Landed
have
in
the
school.
basics, and they were expecting to go read Shakespeare or do algebra or
whatever else,
but they
right.
didn't have the basics in the English language.
But they got passed along just to get them out of the system.
Right, so she was trying to get it so they wouldn't get pushed ahead. She wanted them to learn to read. She knew that that was the way that they were going to get ahead, and that's why she set up the teaching system that she had. But she also was very important, she thought, was the focus of soccer, because they were from different countries and barely spoke English.
But they all knew soccer.
But they knew soccer, and they learned to speak and communicate about soccer together and work as a team, and they were from all different countries. You know, it was just amazing. I just can't say enough about these books, about, you know,
Didn't you have a quote about her that you wanted to read?
Oh, yeah. This was a quote that someone had written, and I'll try to get it in by the time it was.
I think you can do it.
Tracy Elger, who was the team manager, she said, putting Luma, that's the woman who was the coach, on a pedestal is counterproductive. She wrote me once in an email, Luma is really a normal person doing what she can do for the people around her. If people can look at her and see that she's a human, not a saint or a superhero, that she doesn't and can't do everything or affect miracles, then maybe they can say to themselves, I need to look around myself and see my neighborhood and what is going on here in the 5 streets over. And what can I do in terms of investing myself and my time to be present for the people around me and to do something positive for change in my community. Quote, no one person can do everything, she said, but we can all do something.
See, told you could get it in. And I want to thank you for putting on this very powerful show, because it needed to be done. We all forget that we can do something. We get into our own lives and we forget to look to see where we can make a difference.
So let's hope that we can open up, and if you see someone that looks a little different, you know,
Right.
welcome them and try to find out what their story is, because
That's
be
all they
really
want is
horrible.
for people to
Yeah.
see them, not give them a handout. They just
Yeah.
want to be seen for who they are.
and we can learn from them.
Yes, we can. We're going to say power to the people at this point, and we will see you next week. Have a good evening.
And we'll talk about voting.
Yep.
There's power in a factory, power in the land, power in the hand of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past are all learned with workers' blood. The strikes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities and the farmlands to trenches.